He looked me in the eyes and said, "You're just the nanny." That was the moment I knew, no matter how much love I gave, I'd never be enough for him. But then his son asked me something that shattered my heart in a whole new way. If you've ever been underestimated, unappreciated, or made to feel invisible, this story is for you. Make sure you watch till the end. You'll understand why being just the nanny was never the whole truth. I never thought I'd end up here. Honestly, being a nanny wasn't part of some grand plan. I was fresh out of college, juggling part-time jobs, trying to figure out what direction my life was supposed to take. I had a degree, a few internships, and a lot of unanswered questions. What I did know, with absolute certainty, was that I loved kids. I always had. There's just something about their honesty, the way they see the world with such open hearts. It felt natural being around them. So, when this full-time nanny position popped up, I took it, not because I had it all figured out, but because I needed a job. And this one felt like it might not be just a job. I remember telling myself it would be temporary, a stepping stone, just until I got something more professional, something that made my parents feel like I wasn't wasting my degree. But looking back, I had no clue what I was walking into. No idea that a little boy, a stranger, would change my world completely. And even less idea that his father would make me question everything I believed about love, value, and myself. When I first met them, it all felt very formal, like a job interview with no warmth. The house was big, spotless, the kind of place where everything looked like it had been carefully arranged for a magazine shoot. I remember standing there, clutching my little folder of references and CPR certifications, and wondering if I looked too young, too inexperienced. The father opened the door. Tall, polished, sharp eyes that seemed to size me up in seconds. He introduced himself with a firm handshake and a tone that told me this wasn't going to be a warm and fuzzy kind of working relationship. He wasn't rude exactly, just distant, professional. Cold even. He gave me a quick rundown of the schedule, expectations, and house rules, like he'd done it 100 times before. And then he gestured toward the staircase and said, "He's upstairs." He, his son. No name, no warmth, just he. I walked up quietly, trying not to overthink it. I found a little boy sitting on the floor surrounded by toy cars, but not playing with any of them. He looked up at me, eyes big and sad, like he was waiting for someone else to walk through the door. We just stared at each other for a moment, like neither of us knew what came next. His mom wasn't around. I didn't know the details at first, only that she'd left the year before. No one ever mentioned her by name. There were no pictures, just silence where her presence should have been. I didn't know it then, but that quiet little boy upstairs and all that unspoken grief in that house were about to become the center of my life in ways I never saw coming. The first few days were awkward. He barely spoke. He'd just sit near me, not really with me, eyes always drifting toward the door like he was waiting for someone else to show up. I didn't push. I just stayed close, offered snacks, read him stories, built blocks, and let them fall over. It was quiet, but not empty. Slowly, little things began to change. One morning, I found a crayon drawing on the kitchen table. It was a mess of lines and colors, but in the corner, there was a stick figure with long hair and a smile. "You drew this?" I asked. He nodded without looking up. "That's me," he whispered, then pointed to the second figure. "And you." That was the first time he claimed me. After that, he started sitting closer, laughing more. He'd wrap his arms around my leg when I stood up, or quietly take my hand while we watched cartoons. And then came the big moment. One afternoon, completely out of nowhere, he looked at me and said my name. Just my name. But it was the way he said it, like it was his word for safety. I started to realize this job wasn't just about routines and snack times. It was about filling spaces, emotional ones, the kind that can't be seen but are always felt. I saw how deeply he needed someone to stay, not just to be there, but to stay. And I started to care in a way that surprised even me. I wasn't trying to replace anyone. I just wanted to be what he needed, because somewhere along the way, without even noticing, I needed him too. And that's where everything started to shift. It didn't take long for him to notice the bond growing between me and his son. At first, he said nothing, just watched from a distance. But I could feel it. The way his eyes lingered a little too long when he walked past the playroom, the way he cleared his throat when he caught us laughing too hard. Then, one evening, after the boy had gone to bed, he asked to speak with me. We were in the kitchen. He stood there, arms crossed, voice low and flat. "I think you're getting a little too involved," he said. I blinked. "I'm just doing my job." He shook his head. "Your job is to care for him, not become his mother." That word hit like a slap. Mother. I hadn't tried to be that. I wasn't even sure what I was, just that I was someone this child trusted. But from that moment on, something changed between me and his father. He started calling me just the nanny. Not directly to me at first, but in phone calls. I'd overhear it. "I'll be late, but the nanny's there." Or, "The nanny can handle it." Never my name, never my presence, just my function. And the more his son clung to me, the colder the father became. Like love was a threat, like affection had to be controlled. He'd correct me in front of his son, even for small things, how I folded clothes, how I cut fruit. Once, I laughed too loud at something the boy said, and he muttered under his breath, "It's not a show, you know." I told myself to let it go, stay professional, keep my distance. But deep down, I knew something was building, something I wouldn't be able to ignore for much long. It happened on a quiet Tuesday afternoon. We were sitting on the living room floor, surrounded by Legos, just talking about nothing, the way kids do. He was lining up tiny blocks in perfect rows, focused but smiling. Then out of nowhere, he looked up at me with those big, honest eyes and asked, "Are you my real mommy?" I froze. The question hit me in a way I didn't expect, not because it was awkward or inappropriate, but because it was sincere. It wasn't confusion. It was longing. A tiny, hopeful question from a child who just wanted to make sense of the love he felt. I gently told him no, I wasn't his mommy, but I was someone who cared about him very, very much. He nodded slowly, like he understood, but his little shoulders slumped, like it wasn't the answer he'd hoped for. What I didn't know was that his father had been standing at the top of the stairs, listening. He came down like a storm. "What did you say to him?" he snapped. I tried to explain calmly that his son had asked me a question and I'd answered with care, but he wasn't hearing any of it. "You're confusing him," he barked. "You're overstepping. You're just the nanny." That was the first time he said it to my face, and it stung, not because of the words themselves, but because I realized he didn't see any of it. Not the quiet healing, the trust, the comfort, the laughter. To him, I was only filling a slot on the payroll, nothing more. That night, I cried in the guest room after everyone was asleep. Not because I was hurt by him, but because I knew his son would never understand why I had to start pulling away. After that night, everything felt different. I started moving through the house like I was walking on eggshells. I kept my tone lighter, my distance greater. I didn't sit as close during story time. I didn't laugh as loudly. I didn't hold his hand when we walked to the park. I told myself I was doing the right thing, giving space, being just the nanny like I'd been told. but it didn't feel right. And he noticed. He didn't say much at first, but the sparkle in his eyes started to fade. He stopped asking questions, stopped drawing pictures. At bedtime, he used to ask me to stay in the room until he fell asleep. Now he just turned his face to the wall and said nothing at all. I could feel him slipping, and it tore me apart, because I knew I was the one pulling away, even if it was to protect him and myself. The father didn't say much either. He'd leave early, come home late. There were no more sharp words, but also no kindness, just silence. It was like we were all pretending not to feel what we felt. And I started to ask myself, what was I doing here? Why was love something to hide? Why did caring too much make me the problem? But even through the distance, he'd still glance back at me, still reach for my hand sometimes, then stop himself. And every time he did, it broke something in me. Because I knew what we had wasn't wrong. It was real, and it mattered. But sometimes in other people's houses, love doesn't get a say. And in that silence, I realized the hardest thing wasn't being told I was just the nanny. It was starting to believe it. It was late one night when I found it. I'd been tidying up after dinner, just the usual toys and crayon trails across the table, when I noticed his backpack was unzipped and spilling over. I bent down to organize it, and that's when I saw the drawing. Folded up, tucked in the smallest pocket, like something precious. It was a picture of me and him, two stick figures again, hand in hand, standing under a crooked sun. But this time, written above the figures in his messy, wobbly handwriting, was one word: Mommy. My chest tightened so hard, it felt hard to breathe. I sat there on the kitchen floor, holding that crumpled paper like it was glass. A few minutes later, I heard soft footsteps. He was supposed to be asleep, but there he was, rubbing his eyes, dragging his blanket behind him. He climbed into my lap without saying a word and leaned his head on my shoulder. And then, barely above a whisper, he said, I wish you were my mommy. I didn't know what to say. I didn't want to lie, and I didn't want to promise anything I couldn't give. So I just held him, tight, hoping that maybe silence could say what words couldn't. That night, I sat by his bed until he fell asleep. I watched him breathe, watched his tiny fingers curl around the edge of the blanket, and I realized something I hadn't let myself admit before. I loved him, not like a caregiver, not like someone doing a job, like family. And I knew, deep down, that what we had went far beyond a title or a paycheck. But love without permission? It doesn't always end the way you hope. It happened without warning. No tension, no buildup. Just a short, cold conversation in the hallway. I think it's time we make a change, he said, not even meeting my eyes. It's best for everyone if we bring in someone new, more neutral. Neutral, like I'd been some kind of emotional hazard. I asked if something had happened, if the child was okay, if I had done something wrong. But he didn't answer. He just repeated, it's best this way. And just like that, it was over. I wasn't allowed to say goodbye. He said it would only confuse things. I remember standing at the door, my bag over my shoulder, heart racing, trying to memorize every part of that house: the creak in the stairs, the smell of crayons and soap, the corner where we read every afternoon. But what haunted me most was the thought of him waking up and finding me gone. No explanation, no hug, no closure. I cried the whole way home, not quietly, not gracefully. The kind of crying that rips through you, messy and real, because I knew he wouldn't understand. And I couldn't explain it to him. Not now, maybe not ever. For days, I kept checking my phone, hoping maybe the father would call, say he changed his mind. Maybe the little boy would find a way to reach me, a message, a note, something. But nothing came. And for the first time, I understood what people meant when they said your heart can actually ache, because mine did, not for the job I lost, but for the little boy I had to leave behind, not because I stopped loving him, but because someone else decided my love didn't belong. Months passed. I tried to move on, found another job, different family, different rhythm, but nothing felt the same. A part of me still lived in that quiet house, in bedtime stories left unfinished, and little shoes I used to tie. Then one afternoon, as I was sorting through mail, I saw it, a small envelope with shaky handwriting, no return address. Inside was a single sheet of paper, folded twice, and a crayon drawing. Just like before, two stick figures holding hands under a sun, and again the word mommy written above me. I stared at it for a long time, hands trembling. Below the drawing, written in careful, uneven letters, were the words, I miss you. Do you miss me too? Tears welled in my eyes before I could stop them. It was like time folded in on itself. All the love, all the ache, all the unanswered questions flooding back in an instant. I never knew how he found a way to send it. Maybe he begged his dad. Maybe someone helped him. But it didn't matter, because that little letter told me everything I needed to know. He remembered. He still loved me. And he still knew who I was. I still have that letter. I keep it in a small wooden box with a few other things. Things that remind me of who I was in that chapter of my life. A paper flower he made. A button that fell off his favorite shirt. That drawing. Sometimes I wonder what he remembers now. If he still thinks of me when he sees someone reading stories or tying shoelaces. I don't know, and maybe I never will. But here's what I do know. I wasn't just the nanny. I was someone who showed up every day with her whole heart. Someone who gave love freely, even when it wasn't welcomed or understood. Someone who mattered deeply to a little boy who needed to feel safe, seen, and held. And maybe the world didn't give me a title for that. Maybe his father never did, but that boy did. He knew. And that's enough. Healing doesn't always come wrapped in closure. Sometimes it comes in a letter written in crayon, or in the quiet truth that love, real love, doesn't disappear just because someone else couldn't handle it. I was never just anything, and I never will be again. If you've ever loved quietly, supported someone behind the scenes, or been told you don't matter, know this, you do. Love leaves marks no title can erase. Share this story with someone who needs to hear that today.